And hello again, this is Victor Dominguez. I'm the Executive Director of Business Performance USA. Welcome to our webinar today, and we welcome our guest, Kent Stroman, who I will introduce to you very shortly. We're really thrilled to have you today, and I'm just going to take care of a couple of housekeeping items. You've joined, first of all, a webinar put on by Business Performance USA. We're a nonprofit. We don't charge money for this. We never will. Membership to our organization is free. And just what are we is the question. Well, we're really a group of professionals and independent business owners, consultants, who believe in a corporate social responsibility program, and that's why we started Business Performance USA. We're here to share our knowledge and our experience because we believe when organizations prosper, so do our communities. And we think there's just tremendous amount of talent out there in the workplace and in nonprofits and in faith-based organizations. And we want to release that talent, if you will, and really tap into it. So we just are here to give back because that's what we think we should be doing with our businesses and our lives. And that's why we welcome you into our world, and we would be honored to participate in your world, and that's why we're having this webinar today. So I'm going to move on. Quick introductions here. That's me on the left. I'm a co-founder of Business Performance USA along with Dr. Jeff Stewart, Cynthia Stewart, and Roz Davis Grimes. Kent is both a business partner of ours and a colleague and friend, and we really just enjoy him immensely. And I know a lot of you on this webinar know Kent already, and some are meeting him today. A wonderful gentleman, kind, giving, and smart. And he really moves organizations forward with his strategic planning and his work on boards and his work with fundraising. So you're going to enjoy Kent. Again, today, ask questions over the chat feature or the question feature. I monitor both, and we want to make this interactive. We'll try and answer questions as they come up. We may have to park some towards the end of the webinar. If we're really busy, we may have to answer your questions offline, and you can contact me or I will contact you. There's my email address below, victor@businessperformanceusa.org. And there you go. Quick introduction here for Kent. Kent's a tall guy. I mean, he looks tall in this photo. I'd want him center of my basketball team. He's America's Asking Coach. He teaches people really how to ask what their organization needs, and often that relates to fundraising and building endowment funds. But he does much more than that, and he really lives his purpose in life to equip, inspire, and encourage others. He's an author. He's a speaker. He's a dedicated leader. He wins awards because he's just out there in the world giving back. A consultant, of course, CPA, so he's got a sharp mind. Highly educated, and just all-around executive, and again, a wonderful individual. And we're honored to have Kent, and we're honored to have all of you attend this webinar today once again. Kent, I'm going to turn this over to you and let you just do your thing.
Well, thank you, Victor, and thanks for that nice introduction. It's great that everybody's attending today, and we want to add some value as it relates to strategic planning. So 5 tips to jumpstart your strategic plan. And let me just give a real quick overview. Here's what our 5 tips consist of. First of all, it's the big screen. Excuse me, I'm looking at a note here that says screen. It's the big question of why. I'll fill out that in just a moment. And then number 2 is a sequence for success, and we're going to talk about what it means to do first things first. Next, I want to share 4 horizons with you. How far should we be looking in the strategic planning process? And then talk a little bit about the roles. Which jobs belong to which individuals or which entities? And then number 5, a focus on 5 strategic goals. Before we get started on that, however, I just want to share a bonus, and that is some trends in strategic planning.
Ken, I'm going to jump in here real fast.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we're showing the screen, so you should get a window popping up confirming that you're going to share your screen.
Got it. And
There
now
it
is
is.
it? Okay. And do I need to do anything with the control panel on the right?
Nope, I'll take care of that. You just click
Okay.
away when you want to move to your
Perfect.
next slide. Thanks, Ken.
Perfect. On we go. You bet. Yeah. So the question is, what are some trends in strategic planning? Or my question is, have you been barking up the wrong tree? And I want to give credit. My mentor when it comes to strategic planning is Dr. Sandra Hughes, and Sandra has since retired. She was a longtime consultant for BoardSource, as well as her own consulting firm. But just to share some insights and emerging trends as it relates to strategic planning, a bit of an overview, and that is we're seeing fewer boards who have strategic planning committees, but yet more task forces. And the entire board is being involved in discussing the future, not just limiting it to a committee or a task force. A best practice is an annual board retreat, which usually includes reviewing the mission and looking at that long-term horizon. We're also seeing less time spent on planning, more time spent on strategic discussions. And we're doing that in all the meetings, not just every 1, 2, or 3 years. So think about your own board and how you approach the whole idea of strategy. And increased scenario planning and generative thinking. And focus more around the framework instead of the plan. And initially, I mentioned that tip number 5 talks about 5 strategic goals. And so we're going to focus on why that framework is essential and how to use that in the strategic planning process. So with that, now let's go back to tip number 1, and it is the big question of why. When we approach strategic planning, one of the questions that I'm curious about is, why are we engaging in this process? And oftentimes I'll hear somebody said we need to have a strategic plan every 3, 4, 5 years. Well, if the reason we're doing it is no more well-defined than somebody told us we ought to, that really falls short. So let me just share with you some big questions which I think are an important part of the strategy process. Big question, what are we trying to accomplish? Or another way I like to ask that is, when we feel like we've arrived, where will we be specifically with as much description as possible? So what are we trying to accomplish? Why does our mission matter? Yes, the mission of the organization does matter, but in the planning process, is that front and center? Why is it crucial? And this next one I really love, and that is, whose life will we change? What will be different in the world as a result of what we accomplish both in the immediate, the short term, and the longer term future? And I love it when we can actually put a name and a face on that person whose life is going to be different. And then the last question here in terms of our big questions is, the journey worth it? There are some endeavors that are achievable, that would be noble, that would say there's not enough reward in it for us to engage in the pursuit. So focus on these big questions. And I'm going to share a quote. In fact, I think I may have a quote in with each of our 5 tips, but this comes from Dr. John Maxwell, and he says, asking why helps you open your mind to possibilities and opportunities. If you jump to how too quickly, you might miss that. So focus on why. What is the purpose behind what we're doing? So that's tip number 1. And I want to echo what Victor mentioned, and that is, if you have thoughts, comments, questions along the way, please don't feel like you have to wait until the end. There will be a few moments for questions at the end, but feel free to raise your hand, type a question in the chat box, or express it otherwise, and we'll take those as we go.
Ken, real quick.
So with that, let's move on to tip. Yeah.
Real quick, and sometimes I'll jump in and surprise you. Sorry about that. It's really just some input Strategy is absolutely critical, but execution on strategy is absolutely paramount, and that's where we see as consultants many organizations fail to succeed. And starting with the question why, across the entire organization, not just those who are working on the strategic plan, is essential, because you want to execute and align resources throughout the entire organization. And people want to provide their input. They feel valuable then, and they have good ideas to contribute. So start the question why throughout the organization and get them excited and on board and ready to contribute to the, fulfilling the strategic plan. Thanks, Ken.
Exactly, and I appreciate that segue, because when we get to tip number 4 that talks about the roles in strategic planning, we'll identify who needs to be involved in the process and when. But part of the when question is on tip number 2, and that is as it relates to the sequence for success. Now, we all want to be successful. We want to see results, and we'd like to see them now, right? I know that's the way I feel. However, here's what we've found in our work through decades of experience with numerous different kinds of organizations, and that is if we're going to achieve the results, we have to begin with first things first. And I want you to notice the sequence, and this is what we recommend for our clients and for all those we serve, whether we're addressing strategy, governance, fundraising, business development, whatever it is, and that is the first thing is vision. I've come to believe that vision may be one of the most precious commodities in all the world. And until we have clarity of vision, it's really going to be impossible for us to answer that earlier question of why. And so begin with vision. Let's get unity around our vision. And a little bit later, we're going to talk about a horizon that is far enough out that we have time for reaction. So let's begin with vision. And then after we have clear vision, we want to come behind that with very specific plans or strategic goals. That's the primary focus of what we're talking about today. But don't try to do strategic planning if we don't have clarity of vision. It's in the wrong sequence. However, once we do have vision, out of that flows our strategic plans and goals, which then we say, gather the resources. Here's why we say that. Resources are attracted to strategic plans that address a clear vision. Oftentimes we want people, write a check and then we'll decide what to do with it. Guess what? It doesn't work that way. So after the resources are in place, then, and this is, Victor, what you were referring to earlier, now it's time for execution. It's time for action or implementation. And don't try to implement until you have the resources in place to deliver the plans and achieve the vision. So then finally, that gives us the results. And results come after execution, which follows accumulation of resource, which flows out of strategic plans and goals, which are all driven by vision. And so again, I want to just encourage, as you go back to your organization, regardless of what that organization is, whether it's business, education, religious, whether it's your church, foundation, charitable organization, apply this sequence, and I think you'll find that sequence does matter as we put first things first. So here's a quote from a historical figure that you may recall, Henry Ford. He was quoted as saying that he was looking for a lot of folks who he said have an infinite capacity to not know what can't be done. And I love that. Some of the, sometimes I encounter people and they are so familiar with the problem and they're convinced of what cannot happen. And it's amazing, once we're convinced, we go to work proving ourselves right. And so like Henry Ford, I love it when I connect with people who have that capacity to not know what can't be done and go out and do what others think is impossible and bring it to success. So with that, pause for a moment in case there are comments and questions.
We're good, Ken.
And
I got
hearing
one
none,
question
let's move on to
about
tip
sharing slides.
number
We're good
3.
on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Keep. No, we're good. I'm answering a few questions on chat one-on-one.
Okay.
So please
Okay.
continue.
Yes. So tip number 3 is 4 horizons in strategic planning. And again, I want to give credit to my friends at BoardSource. But think about these 4 horizons. Horizon number 1, we're looking 10 to 30 years out. Now, I want to be clear on this. I'm not recommending that we make specific, even strategic or operational plans on the 10 to 30-year horizon. However, this is where we begin with the strategic thinking process, and we're focusing on core ideology, on our purpose, our values, and even our visionary BHAGs. I was working with a group recently, and somebody said, "Well, BHAGs, what are BHAGs?" Okay, big, hairy, audacious goals. What are those goals that are so big that when we speak them, it just sounds audacious? We sound like we're out there on the edge. And yes, we need to have big, hairy, audacious goals. And so as we look 30 years out, 20 years out, 10 years out, what is at our very core? What are the ideas that will support us over the long run? What purpose do we hold to, and what values guide everything we do? As we look at that distance, it helps us accomplish one of the crucial things that belongs to the governing board of any organization, and that is to set the direction. Okay, we say that the board's role is to set the direction, the destination, and the duration. So as it relates to direction, which direction are we headed? Up, down, right, left, ahead, backwards, north, south. Well, that's what we're doing at the 10 to 30 year out. We're talking about direction. When we come to horizon number 2, now we're looking 5 to 10 years out. Now think for just a moment how long that really is. This is March 2015. So 5 years ago, March 2010, where were you? What were you doing? What was your life like? Or go back even 10 years. Now we're in 2005. Wow, what a different world we live in. And so on this horizon, we're looking at our mission statement, and we're asking ourselves questions about our assumptions for the future. Victor didn't mention this, but I live in oil country. I'm in Oklahoma. And we're all enjoying that $2, $2.50 gas price at the pump. But let me tell you, in our state, there are some serious concerns around the price of oil where it is today. Well, major companies aren't so concerned about what's the price of a barrel of oil or a gallon of gasoline today, tomorrow, the next week, next month. But as we look out for the next 2-3 years, the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to form our assumptions or be an example of an assumption for the future. So our purpose as an entity, do we expect that that purpose will continue in perpetuity? Will it still be relevant 5 years out, 10 years out? Those are the kinds of questions that we want to be asking at this horizon. When we move to horizon number 3, now we're focused on 2 to 5 years out. And frankly, I'll just tell you that with the clients that we serve, here's where we ask them to really become clear. Horizons number 1 and 2 are somewhat nebulous, maybe even intentionally ambiguous to a degree. They're helping us to set the direction. On horizon number 3, though, we're asking questions about destination. Again, where do we want to be when we arrive? And so with that, we want to be very specific with our strategic goals and our strategic framework. You'll hear me talk more about goals and framework than plans. I think a lot of us have been part of the process where we go through months, maybe even years of planning. We end up with a very detailed, specific document Usually it's in a 3-ring binder, 2-3 inches. I even saw somebody the other day, I think it was an 8-inch 3-ring binder. That thing was amazing. Well, we're defining solutions to a problem that we can't even, that exists in a world that we can't imagine. And when we get to that world, it's a whole different set of problems. And so rather than making decisions, let's establish a framework that tells us how we'll make decisions. Rather than determining the environment within which we'll operate, yes, we want to anticipate that, but rather than determining it, let's come up with a framework that says when we encounter changes, here's how we'll go about responding to it. So that's our horizon number 3, 2 to 5 years out, and this is the horizon at which we think that the majority of the effort should be focused on as it relates to strategy and planning for the future. That brings up, though, horizon number 4, and there we're looking 1 to 2 years out. Frankly, if let's say the organization's on a calendar year, it's March 2015, I consider 2015 and 2016 to already be pretty well in place. And whatever we're doing there is, for the large part, it's operational. And so we're dealing with tactical issues, we're addressing marketing and identifying success measures. Okay, I have to tell you, recently I got a phone call. Somebody said, Ken, I wanted to see if you would be willing to lead our board retreat. Well, sure, I'm interested in that. They said, we want to put together our strategic plan for this year. Ouch. If we're talking strategic plan and this year, I know that we're already behind. We're probably 24 months short of where we should be focusing. So the 4 horizons help us to address the questions of direction, destination, and duration. Where do we want to arrive? When should we get there?
Kent, I'll just jump in.
So again, let me just share a quote with you. Yeah.
Go ahead with your quote, then I'll loop back.
Yeah, so I love this quote from Benjamin Disraeli. He says, nurture great thoughts, for you will never go higher than your thoughts. And to me, one of the most valuable parts of strategic planning is that visioning for the future, lifting our sights, raising our thoughts, and establishing a horizon beyond what we look at in the day-to-day work life. Victor?
Thanks, Kent, for that. Just referencing back to the previous slide, we don't need to go there. When I got into business, I've been in business 25 plus years. Corporations were working on 10-year plans on average. After the financial collapse of 2007, corporations literally started working on quarterly plans. They threw everything out the window because they were into survival mode. And I have a lot of empathy for that. A lot of businesses are still in the survival mode, and I can appreciate that you're working on a quarterly plan, quarterly results. I really would encourage everyone to pin hard results to the 3-year plan, like Kent said, and of course be visionary out to 30 years. But setting expectations to manage to even a 3-year plan these days is difficult, and setting expectations for your employees, your whole stakeholders, employees, customers, investors, which is critical, industry and community, meaning that people panic if their quarterly results are not getting them to their, quote, numbers. So you got to keep people focused on the big picture of where you're going at within the 3-year plan, and not make drastic navigation changes on a quarterly basis, because that lacks discipline, and it's ultimately not going to get you where you're going. Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, and Victor, I appreciate you bringing focus to times of great uncertainty. And whether it's the financial collapse of 2008-9, or even going back to 2001 and the terror attacks right here in our own country, if we have clarity for our long-term vision, it helps us know what we need to do today, even during times of uncertainty. And yeah, we're really on the same page. So let's go to tip number 4. And here we're addressing the roles in strategic planning, who does what. And before we jump into that, I just want to share, Here's my experience. One of the reasons that there's so much frustration around strategic planning is that oftentimes everybody's doing the other party's job. Here's what I mean by that. We're in a board meeting. The board meeting's coming to a conclusion, and somebody mentions, you know, it's been too long since we've updated our strategic plan, or I just came from a conference last year, and somebody says that we need to do strategic planning, so this is something we need to address. So what happens? It's at the end of the board meeting. Everybody's tired. And so somebody on the board says, well, Jill Smith is executive director. Jill, why don't you bring us the first draft of a strategic plan at our next meeting? So now we've tasked the wrong person with the right job, but Jill dutifully goes out and does as she's been requested or directed. She comes back to the next meeting, she brings a framework or a strategic plan. Now the board, realizing they need to do something, they'll go to work and start trying to put some flesh on the bones. And in reality, what has just happened is everybody's done the other person's job. They're not well equipped to do it. The result isn't satisfactory, and consequently, it's somewhat of an exercise in futility. The next time we address the topic, a lot of frustration is very keen in our memory. So what I want to do is just share with you the roles in strategic planning. Now this slide is just a little bit busy, but I want to point out a couple of things that I think you'll appreciate. The dots represent primary responsibility. So if you look at the first activity, it's to assure that strategic planning takes place. Look at the different entities, the different roles that we're identifying in an organization. We have the board, or board members. That's the left-hand column. That's the blue. Next, in pink, other volunteers. The next column represents the CEO. And then we have other staff members, funders, and then your facilitator or consultant. On each of these, we identify one and one only primary responsibility holder. The crosses, on the other hand, indicate shared involvement for a given activity. But you'll notice that on every activity, there's only one dot. It's important to know who's in charge, who's carrying primary responsibility. So let's go down through this very quickly. The first activity, to assure that strategic planning takes place, the primary responsibility lies with the board. There is a support role, or shared involvement, if you would, with its chief executive officer. You'll notice that's defined exactly the opposite of what we described earlier, which is how we typically go about this. Activity number 2 is to facilitate the planning process. Now, this may sound like a self-serving comment, but coming from a consultant, someone who facilitates a lot of board work and strategic planning. But I want to suggest that that right-hand column, your external facilitator, is the right tool for that job. Why is that? There's an objectivity that that only someone from the outside can bring. And so you may have somebody on the board, or even as board chair or executive director, that's very skilled at leading the strategic planning process. And so they may be professionally qualified, they may be personally qualified, but I would suggest that they are positionally disqualified. And in my own experience, for boards that I serve on, while I'm very capable of leading that process, that capability is disqualified because I'm an insider. So activity number 3 is to envision the 10 to 30 year horizon. You remember on the a couple of slides back, we said that the horizon number 1 is looking 10 to 30 years out. Okay, who should be doing that? Should the staff be doing that? No, that's operational. That's at the execution level. Instead, our board, who sets the direction, needs to be envisioning that future 10 to 30 years out. Is there a role for the CEO? Yes, there is, but that's a support role, not a primary leadership role. Activity number 4 is looking at the next horizon. That's 5 to 10 years out. And as is the case also with the 2 to 5 year horizon, these are shaped by the primary responsibility of the governing board with support from the CEO. Now, once we have clarity around that, so we're beginning now to articulate the strategic goals. And this is what, you remember the horizon? We said 3 to 5 years out, or 2 or 3 years to 5 years out. What are our strategic measures? Now, these aren't the specific nitty-gritty kind of beans in a jar, but these are at the strategic level. Our board, with the assistance of the CEO and the facilitator, are going to articulate those. On activity number 7, then, we actually begin to develop the strategic plan. Notice now the primary responsibility shifts to the CEO. Now we're involving other staff members and perhaps the assistance of our outside facilitator. So if you want to think of it this way, somebody said, you know, our strategic goal 5 years from now is we want to go on a family vacation to Disneyland. Okay, well, that gives us some time. There are a lot of variables involved. Now, whether we raise the money for that by selling cookies or taking on an additional job, that's not a governance level question. That's more of an operational level. So we say that now the staff is coming in and we're talking about, well, here's what the real world's like. Here's some of the different avenues through which we might achieve those strategic goals. Okay, so we begin to involve, on a very intentional basis, involve the support staff at that point. That moves us then to activity number 8, to review the strategic plan before it's adopted. And we're doing that now with other volunteers and with funders. Why is this? Ultimately, we're going to ask those people to shoulder the activity to make it possible. Perhaps in a business situation, this would be customers, vendors, business partners. Before we review before we adopt our strategic plans, I want to get outsiders' input into it for 2 reasons. Number 1, I want to get their insight. Number 2, I want them to begin to be able to buy into the process. The next step, activity number 9, is we're recommending the plan for approval. The recommendation comes from the CEO and it is made to the governing board. So activity number 10 involves the adoption of the strategic plan. Once that plan's been adopted by the board, you'll notice we go to activity 11, and that is to create the operating plan. This is 1 to 2 years out. So now that we know what our destination is, what our direction is, what the duration is, now we can really flesh that out, again, under the leadership of the CEO and the assistance of the rest of the executive team and the support staff. Activity number 12, we implement the plans across the board. And then step 13, we're monitoring and assessing progress. Finally, notice we have a blue dot again. The primary responsibility for holding the organization accountable for achieving the strategic plan remains with the board. So we're not neglecting that. Now, out of consideration of time, let me just move on to tip number 5, which is 5 strategic goals. And here we really want to zero in and focus. So as you think about putting together your strategic goals, a couple of suggestions I want to make even before we jump into that is that in many areas, think about using measures that are percentages or ratios rather than absolute dollars. There may be, or absolute numbers. There may be some places where that makes sense, but think about this. When we're looking 2 years out, 3 years out, 5 years out, what is a dollar? And even if you look in the last 6 months, How much were you paying for gasoline 6 months ago? How much are you paying now? So if we were having to make a living by our ability to predict the price of a gallon of gasoline, we'd come up wanting. On the other hand, if we can have a framework that says 3 to 4% of our corporate budget will be spent on automobile fuel, you can see how that kind of measure is going to be more strategic. So 5 areas in which we need to have strategic goals. First of all is in the area of governance. Now, let me just state my bias. I believe that the most important committee on any board is the governance committee. I believe the most important activity that a board undertakes is determining who joins the board. So this is all about how we operate, how we establish policy and move forward. And so we need to have strategic goals in the area of governance or board development. Next is program. What are those things that are mission critical for our organization? What are our core programs or products? We need to have strategic goals around those. Is our product mix growing, shrinking? Are we becoming more diverse or more focused? Those would be some examples of some strategic goals. Number 3 has to do with human resources, and I like to think about staff, some of whom are paid and some are not. Much of my work is in the philanthropic area, relies a great deal on volunteers. Those are members of our staff, and so we want to address the well-being of what usually is our most precious resource, and that is our staff. And then the area of number 4, fundraising, or think about this as resource generation and visibility. How are we seen in the marketplace? How do we want to be seen in the marketplace? What are our goals strategically as we look to the future? And then the 5th area of strategic goals are the financial and physical resources. Do we need a larger factory, a smaller factory, new robots, or the same old ones? Do we need additional buildings, automobiles, technology, what have you? If so, what's the price tag for those items? And as we establish our strategic goals, again, think about using ratios and percentages. I wish we had more time. We could spend an entire hour just around some very specific examples of valid, smart strategic goals. However, since we don't have that, let me just share this quote from James Allen. He says, "Good thoughts and actions can never produce bad results. Bad thoughts and actions can never produce good results." So as we go through the process of establishing our strategic goals, let's be sure that we give ourselves time to think and act around the results that we most desire, good results, rather than keeping our focus on the problems that have plagued us in the past.
Kent?
So with that, here's a quick recap. Yes?
I need to jump in for a second. We've got a good question. It actually goes back. I'll read the question, then I'll reference the point in the webinar. Question is, if we need to develop new funding strategies, shouldn't that require board participation with the staff? And that was referencing number 7, develop the strategic plan. So shouldn't that require participation with the board and the staff?
Yeah, so funding strategies, you know, one of the key elements behind the answer to that question, it asks, is this an issue that rises to the level of governance or not? And this is one that could go either direction. Generally, I want the board, you know, kind of, we talk about the proverbial 30,000-foot level. I want the board to address the issues of why, and which is going to come back to direction, destination, and duration. And so to use a military analogy, the 5-star general says we've got to take that hill before midnight tomorrow. So we have clarity. Or maybe, to quote John F. Kennedy, President of the United States, put a man on the moon by the end of this decade. Now, to me, that's a visionary and a governance kind of observation. The how do we do that? What kind of fuel? What kind of vehicle? At what cost? You notice that wasn't addressed. It wasn't addressed by the president. It wasn't addressed at the governance level. Does somebody have to address that? Absolutely. And so I want ultimately, I want the CEO with the staff to come up with those more specific elements and then bring it back to the board so they can either adopt it or reject it. But then it's going to have a context of why this funding strategy makes sense. Let me give you a quick contrast. Again, much of my work is in the charitable field. I wish I had kept track so I could tell you how many times I get a call from usually a development director or a CEO that says, Kent, you've got to help me convince my board that we don't need to do another fundraising event. Okay, we're doing a thon, you know, a golf marathon, a run, whatever it is, and the board comes up with this new strategy. Oftentimes, that is an activity that's done at the board level with inadequate information. It gets imposed on the organization, and it becomes counterproductive. So from an overall standpoint, again, I would rather see the initiation of those strategies take place at the staff level where you've got the full context, take it back to the board, and if it is a misfit with our strategy for long term, then let them reject it, clarify it, and send it back. Does that help?
Yes, we got the gentleman asked a question, commented, good direction, thank you. There's other issues about staff and their buy-in, which you address, Kent, at the very beginning, teaching them why, getting them to really buy in, but also teaching staff how to articulate exactly what their business requirements are, teaching them how to team and collaborate with other departments or silos to tap capacity within the organization that may be unfulfilled, teaching them problem-solving skills. But staff is critical because they're either going to buy in and get inspired, or sometimes we see sabotage take place because the goal is too big and audacious and hairy. So those are other issues that we won't have time for today, but we encourage this individual that asks to get back with you and myself and take it deeper if they care to.
Yeah, and so again, I would just refer back to the planning roles and ask yourself on each matter, at what point, which of the activities does that relate to, and then if it is staff, I mean, think about this. This is a big question that I think also merits its own webinar, but the question, who works for whom? Does the board work for the staff? Does the board work for the CEO? Does the CEO work for the board? Does the CEO work for the staff? And I mean, those are really some organizational culture questions which oftentimes reflect something that's less than a healthy structure that needs clarification if we're going to be productive over the long run. So maybe a quick recap, and then let's see if we perhaps have time for a couple more questions. On the screen, you just see the reminder of our 5 tips. The big question is why. Don't neglect the clarity around the why. In fact, the question that was just raised reflects, or in my mind, it reflects a possible deficiency about clarity on the why from the boardroom. I had a subordinate employee come to me one time, and she said, Kent, I just need to know, are we on the same page? Well, this was a staff member who was talking to a vice president, and who oftentimes we were not on the same page. And so I said to her, I said, well, if you're on my page, we're on the same page. And I said, it's not because it's mine, but it's because that's the role that I serve as vice president. And so the big question of why, what is our organizational mission and big, hairy, audacious idea? If we've got a staff member who is incongruent with that idea, should the idea change Should the board be replaced, or should we find somebody else on the factory floor? That's tip number one. Tip number two is a sequence for success. Start with vision. Expect results, but expect to achieve results only after we have developed our strategy out of the vision, and once those goals, those strategic goals have attracted resources, and then we have implemented the plans with actions and execution. Tip number three is those 4 horizons, and that is looking at each of those 4 horizons, but spending the majority of our time in strategic planning on horizon number 3, which is the 2 to 5 year time frame. And then tip number 5, the question of roles, the right person doing the right job in the right sequence. And then tip number 5, focusing our strategic goals in these 5 crucial areas rather than being too broad. And so with that, here's in wrap up, I want to ask everybody if you would just consider what is one thing that you will put to use, and I want to say today, is there an action step for you as a result of today's webinar that can make this time prove to be valuable for you in what you're doing, and perhaps it's not just on the job, but in other realms of service. That's my question for you. As we come to our final question and answer session, let me just share this thought with you, and that is, if you feel like you're dissatisfied with your location, well, your location becomes your destination only if you stop moving. So we want to keep moving, but moving in the right direction. What is the right direction? It's one step closer to our strategic goals. And so with that, Victor, let's see if there are any other questions, comments, or thoughts we might respond to in these last few minutes.
Thank you, Kent. And again, we do encourage questions. I have one comment, not so much a question. It gets down to the who works for whom, and I'll have to paraphrase this if I may. And it goes back to the question of why. They solve it with the question why, because really it's not about one person is in charge. In essence, the why is in charge. And when you clearly articulate the why and disseminate that inspiration throughout the organization, that becomes the driving factor, and that's the boss, if you will. You're not serving particular agendas, you're serving the goal and the objective, and that tends to take personalities out of it a little bit, tends to calm turf battles a little bit, and it provides for a rational explanation of, are we serving the why rather than serving an individual? So that's just more of a comment there. I don't know if you have feedback on that, Ken.
Well, very, very good point. In fact, it kind of ties into an observation I've made in years of working with a variety of organizations, and that is, I find that organizations tend to fall into one of 3 categories. Either they are person-centric, and you mentioned personality, okay? Person-centric organization, it's all about somebody. There's a problem-centric organization. We're so familiar with dealing with problems that becomes our identity. And for that organization, if they ever solve the problem, if they run out of problems, they'll create more, because that's just what we do. And then there's the purpose-centric organization, and that is where the main thing isn't a person, it isn't a problem, but it is, like you said, Victor, it's an idea. So the purpose is our mission, and we use the mission to measure everything against. So if there's incongruence between the mission and a person, we say the person's got to go or change or adapt. If there's incongruence between an activity, whether it's a problem or possibility, we may have possibilities that are captivating, but they're not congruent with the mission. Right idea, wrong organization. So yeah, I love the idea. Thanks, Victor.
Okay, we have lots of positive comments, not questions really. and I tend not to use people's names, but I'm happy to, but I defer not to. So we have one active participant. His feedback is best tip using the role chart to define responsibilities and execution. And I agree, it sets that's your game plan, if you will, and addresses a lot of issues right up front. So this individual, Robert by a formal name, recommends make sure you pay attention to the role chart. And in that regards, we always make sure that these webinars are posted on our website, businessperformanceusa.org. You do have to be a member to watch the webinars on demand, but it's free. And the good news is that we monitor that all the time, and you're welcome to continue to ask us questions and make it very specific about your situation. So you'll be able to refer to that role chart specifically. We do have another exclamation point, a quote like that from your last comments about leadership roles and the purpose-driven, personality-driven organizations. Thumbs up for you on that, Kent.
Oh, thank you.
I'm monitoring last chance, but this is everyone's chance for last questions. Another comment, keep the adaptive problem solving working and the purpose of problem solving clear to keep on keeping on. That's a reference that we use often here, adaptive problem solving. That's a webinar in itself, but one begins with the concept that problems are good things. Problems are opportunities to improve and create the ideal customer experience, the ideal benefactor experience for nonprofits. And so, creating an organization that celebrates problems and that makes it okay to bring a problem forward is the very first step to really taking your organization to the next level, and really also capturing added capacity within the organization so you can do more with the same amount that you have. And we call that a return on resources. I'm looking for last comments. I think we're good on questions. I will step in. You see Kent's contact information here, and he's sincere when he says, let's connect. Ken is very generous with his time. He'd be happy to brainstorm with you, and that's what we do at Business Performance USA in general. We brainstorm with our members, so you can always ask us, hey, what about this? And we'll brainstorm about it with you, about your specific information. So please note all of Kent's contact information. There he is again, reaching new heights. And Kent, if you can flip to the last slide here. I think there's a last slide. This is Kent's organization here, Institute for Conversational Fundraising. His mission is his personal mission, equipping, inspiring, and transforming. And this is just another way you can reach out to Kent.
Yeah, so let me just say a big thank you as we wrap up, Victor.
Sure.
My only regret is that we're not physically all in the same room, because I would love to connect, but I know that this wouldn't be possible without the participation of everybody who's on today. And I just want to say big kudos. I wish you every success as you go forward with your strategic planning.
Thank you, Kent. I appreciate that. And here on the last slide is how you can get a hold of us. I am sort of a clearinghouse for all questions and issues and comments. You can always contact me, and if I can't answer it, I find the executive volunteers in our organization who can, such as Kent and Kenna Lewis and Dr. Jeff and Cynthia and on and on. We represent every functional expertise that you will find in any organization, for-profit, nonprofit, faith-based, and we make that functional expertise available to you, but we all share in common that culture matters, ethics matter, and that people are capable of incredible things when you give them the opportunity to demonstrate their leadership and their expertise. So reach out to us, Victor at Business Performance USA. Become a member. It's easy and it's free, and you can have a brain trust at your fingertips to help you through your day. So Thank you again, everyone. Kent, always a pleasure, and look forward to the next time we get to interact. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye now.